everyone, it's Lucy, the producer of Deadly Debbie's Creepy Files. I hope you're all doing good and welcome back to Season 2. I wanted to explain that we will now be releasing bi-weekly episodes simply because of time constraints and workloads that we've been dealing with recently. But we will still be releasing regularly and on time on Thursdays, just every fortnight instead. We thank you so much for supporting this podcast. We really couldn't do it without you guys. You are the best, so thank you. And for now, I'll hand you over to Debbie for the first show of the season. Enjoy.
Hello there, my darlings, and welcome to a brand new season of my Creepy Files. Now, I know it's only been 2 weeks, but, well, it felt like a lifetime ago, and I really missed you all. Well, I did have a wonderful time in Transylvania with my cousins. The problem was, they only wanted to come out at night. It's a good job the family business is a nightclub, because they never surface during the day. Now, on with our very first story of the season. And what would you do if you heard a voice in the dark?
This happened when I was around 5 or 6. I remember it vividly. And it happened shortly after the first dream that I still remember having, but based on what happened in it. It could very well have been sleep paralysis. So, a while later, I wake up one night. My door is open, my lamp is on, just like always. It didn't take me very long to figure out why I'd suddenly woken up. I can hear someone downstairs, speaking very loudly. They were saying, 10, 10, 10, over and over again. It sounded like a boy I knew around that time, who I quite liked. For a moment, I stayed still. Eventually, a mixture of curiosity and fear got the best of me, and I walked into the dark upstairs hallway. My parents' bedroom was just down the hall. My brother's directly across from where I was standing in front of mine. I walked over to the banister in front of the stairs. After turning on the light that was in the staircase, I leaned over, trying to see if I could see into the family room where the voice was. I couldn't. Now, being older, I know there is literally no way for me to see it from there. Anyway, I waited for a moment before going into my parents' bedroom and jumping onto their bed. My brother was already in there, so I just went to the bottom of the bed. I didn't mind, I just needed to not be alone. I fell asleep to the voice still going. I was terrified and used a pillow to try and cover my ears. Later on, when my dad was getting ready for work, we all woke up. He asked what was wrong, and I told him and my mum what had happened. My mum said it must have been her calling my dad's name, as his name is Ben. But I knew that wasn't the case for 3 distinct reasons. The first and most compelling was that I saw her. She was asleep. Her mouth was not moving at all. The second being that I had distinctly heard it coming from the family room. The last was that to me, Ben doesn't sound like 10. Neither does Ren or Ken or any other names. I knew what I had heard. They tried to tell me that it was just a dream. I, of course, tried to convince them that that wasn't true. How would that explain me being in their bed, the light being on? I didn't know what I heard. The only thing down there was a counting train toy that I had, as my brother is 2 years younger than me, and I still played with those things. I did, too, sometimes, as I guess I found them to be fun, I don't know. But that still doesn't explain why it was stuck repeating the number 10 for who knows how long in the middle of the night. As a child, I asked around a lot to see if anyone knew what was going on. No one did. I was left feeling like an idiot, like I was crazy. I know there is no way to prove what happened, and I only hope it wasn't just all in my head or a reaction to the stress of my younger brother's illness.
So this just happened last week, and I have had an eerie and weird feeling that something is not right. So first, let me explain the placement of my house. When you come in, there is a little hall, and in front of you, the bathroom. Then you go to the left, and you have a small kitchen. Then a door. Then it's my bedroom. But it's so big, I turned it into a living room, and right next to my bedroom is my daughter's bedroom. Everything is in an L shape. I'm 24 years old, and I live alone with my daughter, who is 2, and our 2 pet bunnies. So, I had lunch with my daughter, and it started getting cold and dark, so we went into my bedroom and closed the door to the kitchen. She always plays in my bedroom and her bedroom that are directly connected. I was laying on my bed, reading my book, while listening to her making her usual noises, talking to herself, singing, asking me something, moving toys around, the basic children's noises. Suddenly, the house goes completely silent, and after a few seconds, I think that maybe she's being mischievous and doing something she isn't supposed to, like all kids do. So I go and check on her, since I didn't see her from where I was laying. Let me make it clear that there is no way for her to go outside without opening the creaky door to the kitchen that is right in front of me. And she never tried to do it, since the lights in the kitchen are off and she is scared of the dark. So I look everywhere in her bedroom and start calling her name. Nothing. I check in her closet. Nothing. Under her bed, in her little play tent, in her toy chest, under my bed, the sofa, my desk, everywhere. Nothing. She is nowhere to be seen. Let's mention she has never tried to hide and stuff like that. She comes when she is called, so I started to freak out. I knew I didn't hear her leave my bedroom to the kitchen, but I checked anyway. Nothing. The bathroom was empty. Now I'm starting to panic. I go inside again and check everything over, and while I'm in her bedroom, I hear crying from outside and look through my daughter's window to see her outside laying on the ground, only wearing a t-shirt. Not the t-shirt she was previously wearing, but one of the t-shirts she does have. I ran outside, almost falling over, but when I opened the door, silence. She wasn't there. There was no crying. Silence again. I go outside and check everything and can't find her or any trace of her being there. Defeated, I go back upstairs, ready to call 911 when I go to my bedroom and see her calmly playing with some blocks on the floor of her bedroom. She was wearing her original clothes as if she had never disappeared. The t-shirt I saw her wearing outside was in her wardrobe, neatly folded. I was in complete shock and just sat there, staring at my daughter, feeling that if I blinked, she might disappear again. I would really like to know what happened the other day. I just assumed my daughter hid really well somewhere, and when I looked down and heard the cry, that was maybe my imagination kicking in when I saw her on the ground. But I would really give everything not to go through that again. And I just can't understand what happened.
I was born in a small town in Tennessee. We lived there for 2 years before moving to Florida. After some time, we moved back to that small town. When I was 9 years old, we moved into the apartment complex. It wasn't very expensive, and it was on the lower income side of town. We moved into B8, and almost immediately I got a bad feeling. For context, here's how the apartment looked. You could walk into the apartment and see the living room. To the left of the living room was the kitchen. In front of the living room was a hallway that led to 2 bathrooms and 3 bedrooms. The bathrooms were positioned on either side of the hallway. There were 2 rooms on one side of the hallway and 1 on the other. My mother, being the spiritual woman that she was, burned sage around the home with the open windows and put jars of salt in all of the windows. For a period of time this was fine, and my bad feeling went away. It was about 2 months after we moved in that I began having vivid nightmares. I saw the house burning, people watching me while I slept, extreme sleep paralysis that I haven't had since being in that house. I began seeing a little girl, not much younger than me, in period clothing, standing in the corner of my room. Every night I saw her, I had these terrible night terrors. It got to the point that I was trying to stay up for as long as possible, or going to my mum and staying up with her until she inevitably sent me back to my room. While I saw this little girl, I was also seeing this large black mass in our hallway and kitchen. My mother saw the black mass too, but she didn't get a bad feeling from it. However, I always did. Eventually, I was tired of seeing this little girl, so I tried talking to her. I asked her why she was here, why she was tormenting me, and if she could just leave me alone. She never said anything, just kept staring. I asked my mother what I should do, and she told me to just tell her to leave, so I tried that. Every time I saw this little girl, I told her that she needed to leave, and that this is my room now. After a few weeks of this, she finally left me alone, and I was able to get some sleep. But then, we were still dealing with this black mass. It gave me weird vibes, but it never tried to harm us. Occasionally, I would have dreams that I was running away from it, but that was child's play compared to the night terrors I had been having. There would be some times when I was just hanging around in my room and I would hear someone walking down the hallways. I would think it was my brother or uncle walking to the bathroom, but whenever I would look up to see them, I would either see nothing but a hallway, or I would see the head of the black mass peering around the doorway at me and then dart away. It made me uncomfortable, but that's just what we dealt with for a couple of years. At 12 years old, we moved out of those apartments and moved to some different ones. I felt a weird presence, but never saw or heard anything. When I turned 13, we moved back to the old apartments. This time, we were at D15. This was closer to the road and far enough away from B8 that I thought things would be fine. But once again, we saw this shadow in our hallway. I knew it was the same one because the footsteps sounded the same, and it always did the same creepy head tilt when it looked at you. I got curious as to why this thing had followed us from one apartment to another, so I began looking at what the apartment was beforehand, and also the warehouse that was across the street, thinking there might be something there. I found out that the warehouse had been a hospital for a period of time back around the 1960s and 70s, and the apartments were sleeping quarters for the workers. After a bit of time, it shut down and got sold from one owner to the next. It eventually got turned into apartments. To this day, I'm unsure, but I think that the black mass was some kind of doctor who worked at the hospital. In 2016, my mother passed away, and we didn't want to stay in the apartment anymore, so we moved to Florida. We lived there for 3 years, and not much happened paranormal-wise. I turned 18 and decided to move back to the small town to do some personal growth. As soon as I got back, I felt its presence. My sister and I moved into an apartment complex that was about 3 blocks away from the old one, and immediately after moving in, I got the same feeling as I did from B8 and D15. This time, it stayed in the kitchen for the most part. There was also the spirit of a little blonde-haired boy who stayed on the stairs. My niece and nephew would play with him. I would see him from our TV screen. Sometimes I would be sitting in the living room, which was the bedroom at the time, and would look up to see him peering from between the banister. Sometimes we would hear footsteps pounding up and down the stairs, even if we were the only ones in the apartment and our next-door neighbours were out. Our next-door neighbour even asked if we had seen or heard anything weird, and when I told her, she just shrugged and said, "That's exactly what the old neighbour said. She was always knocking on the door asking if we had heard anything. They never had any problems, but most of everyone who lived in our apartment saw something." Back to the Black Mass. So my sister and I had a falling out, and the apartment became mine and my fiancé's. The first night it became ours, Jay was out at work, and I was home alone. I was playing video games and was getting really into it, but I remembered that I needed to replace my gauges so my ears didn't close up. I got up and went to where I had them, and as I turned around to go back to the TV, I saw the same black mass walk out in front of the doorway. It saw that I saw it, and it ducked behind the wall, and then it peeked its head out at me like it had done before. Frankly, I was terrified, so I called a couple of friends, and they came over and stayed with me until Jay came home. Eventually we had to move, and we moved back to Florida. It's been 7 months now, but we haven't seen or heard anything regarding that black mass. I hope that it stays in that small town and away from us.
I am, and have been, a paramedic for about 10 years. My entire career has been spent in emergency medicine responding to 911 calls and providing advanced life support for life-threatening illnesses and injuries. The calls we respond to range from inappropriate use of an ambulance to minutes away from death, and oftentimes it's already too late. This story in particular is going to be very dark. It's going to be very graphic. I'm not going to gloss over any details because the imagery is important. As awful as the story is, I want to make something good come from it. I want to use this story to preach a little and hope it finds someone somewhere and helps them. This is the one and only story I have a hard time sharing, and you'll find out why. With all of that out of the way, this story is my personal Vietnam. I had been working for a couple of years as a paramedic after I graduated from school. The place I worked primarily was in the city, but our service area was the entire county, which is very rural. When you're in school, you go on ride-alongs. You practice your skills with your preceptors on patients, very similar to residency or internship. Your exposure to the job is what you get while on those ride-alongs. Sometimes you get seriously injured patients, and it's terrifying because you sometimes don't always know what to do. You're still learning, but you have your preceptor at your back to protect you from any fuck-ups and guide you. Sometimes, though, you don't get lucky enough to experience some of these horrible things. To some, that may seem like a good thing, but it's important to experience these as it prepares you for a time when you're all alone. There are a couple terms we use, called white cloud and black cloud. White cloud refers to a person, either student or professional, who never gets the exciting, serious calls. The calls always seem to come when you're just getting off shift or you just left the area where the call came in and now another ambulance takes it, and this white cloud can follow this person for any length of time. Black cloud is the opposite. When I was in school, I was a white cloud. I got a few cardiac arrests, bad accidents, things like that. Pretty routine, but nothing that ever really stood out as unique. So a couple years into my career, this white cloud is still kind of hanging over me. That's not to say I hadn't had bad calls before. I have, but it's just not the same. The day this story takes place is Christmas Eve. I worked from 7 a.m. Christmas Eve to 7 a.m. Christmas Day. From what I remember, the day was pretty slow. Most people are with their families, not going outside, getting into accidents or causing mischief. I was working with the charge medic at the time and a brand new EMT who was growing through his FTO, which is the field orientation process. He was with us. A few of my coworkers had made a Christmas dinner that day, so we all had hot food to enjoy while we worked and be away from our families. At our station, we had 2 ambulances with 2 crews, myself, my partner, and our FTO, and the other crew. When night comes, if a call comes into our station, the 2 crews just rotate calls so that we get to sleep a little bit. It was around 11 p.m., and I was sitting in the recliner watching TV. A call came into our station that required us to respond out of the county. One of the guys on the other crew, who was a friend of mine, was asleep in the recliner next to me, so I took the call. The call was initially for a woman who had fallen and hit her head, but was conscious and breathing. Due to the nature of the injury, we responded emergent. It was probably about a 15-minute drive to get to this person's house. As we're getting closer, dispatch informs us now the PT is not conscious, but breathing. As we approach the residence, driving down the street where this little development is, there's flashing lights everywhere. Sheriff's deputies, police, fire department were all there, with some even blocking the entrance to the street. For just a simple head injury, we thought that was pretty weird, and it set a weird vibe for the call. One of the deputies saw us coming and moved his car, allowing us through. Once we got through, this part of the street ended in a cul-de-sac with houses all around it. People were standing on their front porches looking at what was going on. We arrived at the address. There's a vehicle parked in the driveway, still running with officers all around it. The driver's side door was open, and there was an officer standing there and looking like he was talking to someone sitting in the driver's seat. I walked up first with my partner and our EMT FTO behind me. As I approach the rear of the vehicle, I see there's definitely someone sitting inside. There's also a man, middle-aged, in plain clothes standing in front of the vehicles, his lower half lit up by the headlights. He has his hands in his pockets and he's looking rather intently at the person in the vehicle. I walk up to the officer and get a report from him. While the officer is telling me what's going on, I look at the person in the driver's seat. The person sitting in the driver's seat was a middle-aged woman, maybe mid-40s, 50s, sitting back with her head against the headrest, her arms hanging down by her side. I can visibly see her breathing, hear her moaning but not talking. Her eyes are also closed. There's a bit of blood running down from her head past her cheeks and down her chin. There's also a small stream of blood coming from her nose. The officer tells me that she was inside with the family when she came outside to get something from the car. The officer says that the woman's husband, and gestures to the man standing in front of the car, came out to check on her because she was out here for a while. When the husband saw his wife bleeding, he figured she must have fallen and hit her head on something, so he called 911. The officer tells me the woman has not been responding to him. I attempt to speak to the woman. She doesn't answer me, but continues to moan. I perform a sternum rub to cause painful stimuli and hope to get some sort of reaction. I don't get anything. I ask the husband if she's been drinking tonight or if she abuses any drugs that he knows of. He says that she has a few glasses of wine, but no drug use. At this point, I'm thinking she had a head injury and potentially a brain bleed because she's not responding appropriately. I stand where the officer was standing in the driver's side door as I'm performing my assessment. I can't see where the blood's coming from, so I figured she has a laceration or something in her hair that isn't visible. It's at this time the officer comes up to me. He says, "We also found this in the driver's side door compartment." He produces a revolver. I look at the officer and look at the revolver. He looks at me and holds it out. I grab the revolver, flip out the cylinder, and at the same time thinking to myself, oh fuck. In the cylinder is one brass casing, with the primer indented, meaning a round's been fired. With this new information and based on the bleeding, I assumed the PT had put the gun to her temple or something. The fact that she's still breathing and making noise leads me to assume that she missed or the bullet miraculously bounced off if she had held it at a weird angle. Due to the potential for significant head trauma, I decide that we need to place a cervical collar on the woman in case of spinal injury as well. I ask one of the firefighters to grab a collar out of our ambulance. I open the back door of the vehicle, get in behind the woman so I can hold her head stable while the fireman places the collar on. It's only when I do that I see what's really going on. As I slide in behind the PT, I can see the back of her head, something I will never be able to unsee. Looking at the back of her head, I see a grapefruit-sized hole. With my flashlight, I look at the hole, and it's almost empty, except for a large piece of skull that's floating on top of a blood and brain soup. I look up, and on the headliner of the vehicle is a 2-foot diameter halo of blood and brain painted above her, with tiny pieces of skull stuck into the fabric. I look back at the hole. It's a chilly night, so I can see the heat vapors coming out of the hole, similar to how you would be able to see your breath on a cold day. I look out the vehicle at my partner, and I say, we need to go. Now. Either the look on my face or his sense caused him to peek inside the vehicle and see what I was seeing. His eyes grew wide, and all he said was, holy shit. Our EMT FTO quickly went to the ambulance and grabbed the stretcher and backboard. Up until this point, we were taking our time carefully getting her out of the vehicle, but now, carefully and slowly turned into just get her out of the vehicle. Our EMT also grabbed a few large trauma dressings and gauze wraps. I placed the trauma dressing over the hole and wrapped the ever-living shit out of it around her head so that when we moved her into the stretcher, nothing would spill out. With the help of the fire department and police, we moved the woman onto the backboard and put her on the stretcher. The whole time, the husband has been standing at the front of the vehicle watching, not understanding what was happening. As we get the woman on the stretcher, he comes over, and I can see now he has tears on his face. He bends down, kisses her on the cheek, and says, I love you. We quickly get the woman to the ambulance. Due to the woman's injury, her cerebrum, the largest part of the brain, is almost completely gone, meaning she has no motor function, no muscle control, and no cognitive abilities. Her brainstem, however, is still intact. The bullet missed it somehow. The brainstem controls the body's automatic functions like respiratory rate, heart rate, and blood pressure. Due to this, when we moved the woman to the stretcher, her tongue fell against the back of her oral airway, causing a blockage. I knew immediately this was going to happen, so I had my partner set up an intubation supply for me. In the ambulance, I placed the laryngoscope. That's a bladed device used in intubations. I put it into the patient's mouth and moved her jaw and tongue forward, opening her airway. I see the hole in the roof of the woman's mouth. I slide the endotracheal tube through the woman's vocal cords and into her trachea. This gives us a secured airway so we can ventilate the patient. My partner uses an intravenous needle to obtain vascular access. This does the same thing as an IV, but it goes in the bone, and medication and fluids are absorbed by the bone marrow. I place the PT on the cardiac monitor, check her blood pressure and oxygen. At the time, I thought it was the strangest thing. Her blood pressure was actually good. Her heart rate was normal, her oxygen was good, and her cardiac rhythm was normal. We start transporting the patient to the hospital, and I give them a heads up activating the trauma team. After the call, we went back to the station to restock the ambulance and clean up. That's when I saw all the bits of bone and blood on my pants and shirt. Luckily, the charge medic let me go home and take a shower and put on a new pair of clothes. After I changed, I went back to work and the rest of the shift was uneventful. I learned that the next morning around 9 a.m., the family had decided to remove life support and the woman passed away. For many years after that call, I didn't notice a change. I kept doing what I do best and never really thought I'd been affected by it, until I realized that I was. A couple years ago, I had a bad relationship that made me start thinking about myself and who I am. It was something that was always there, but I never really thought anything about it. I just thought it was my personality and who I developed into as an adult. I realized how angry I always was. I wasn't a mean person, but very simple, stupid things would set me off, and I had a bad temper. I was very cynical at the world, still am, and what I thought was a stomach problem, started thinking maybe it was actually anxiety. I decided that I want to figure out what caused me to be this way. I wanted to figure out why I think the way I do, why I act the way I do, so I decided to go see a psychologist. After many months' visits, my psychologist came up with the PTSD diagnosis. I hated it at the time. I hate being categorized as someone with PTSD. It didn't make sense. I can handle anything. Nothing bothers me. But during those visits, as we conversed, the one thing that kept coming up was that call. I didn't realize how much it actually affected me, how much of a wall that I built to shut everyone out and not see who I really am, to protect myself. The more I thought about it, the more I came to realize that it probably does make sense. The reason I tell this story the way I do, with the graphic detail, is because I think everyone needs to understand in its entirety how mental health not only affects a single person, but everyone around them. This is something we talk about at work quite a lot, and there are several coworkers on the ambulance even now that I talk with about this stuff. One of, if not the number one cause of death in first responders, is suicide. If you're someone who has thought about or attempted suicide in the past year, you need to know that taking your life doesn't affect only you. You may think it'll be better this way, but I assure you, it won't. People often say how selfish suicide is, and it's true, because once you're gone, you have no idea the amount of lives you've impacted. If you don't think this is true, or that no one will care, maybe you need to go back and reread my story, because I guarantee people care. I care. So find someone, anyone, just to talk to, be honest. Let them know how you're feeling. I know it's hard, it was for me, but it does get better, you just have to try. So if anyone you know has or does struggle with mental health issues, please reach out. Just be an ear. You don't have to try and solve the problem. Just listen. If you listen, you just may hear something that can help save someone's life.
And that's it for tonight's show, kiddies. I'm just going to finish off typing up here. And I'm done. There's a glass of red in the kitchen with my name on it. Remember to keep sending in your creepy stories to deadlydebbie@mail.com. And I'll see you all next week. Au revoir.